me. This seat is taken. You need to move to economy where you belong." The words sliced through the quiet hum of the first-class cabin, sharp and deliberate. Victoria Ashford stood in the aisle of the Boeing 787 blocking the entrance to seat 1B, with her voice dripping with the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of never being told no. She was 42, platinum blonde hair, pulled into a sleek, low bun, wearing an ivory cashmere dress that hugged every curve. The fabric was form-fitting, elegant, expensive. Cartier bracelets glinted on her wrist as she gestured dismissively at the canvas duffel bag being carried by the man standing before her. Malcolm Durant looked at her calmly. He was 56, with gray-streaked hair cut close to his scalp, wearing a faded charcoal hoodie over a plain white t-shirt and well-worn jeans. His New Balance sneakers had seen better days. In his hand was a boarding pass, clearly marked Suite 1B. "Ma'am, this is my assigned seat." Malcolm's voice was deep, steady, and polite. "I have my boarding pass right here if you'd like to see it." Victoria didn't even glance at the paper. She waved her hand as though swatting away a fly. "I don't need to see anything. Look around you. This is first class on a transatlantic flight. Tickets for these seats cost $28,000. There's obviously been a system error." She turned, slightly addressing the other passengers in row 2 as if enlisting allies. "The airline has been cutting corners lately, letting anyone with an upgrade voucher or rewards points into the premium cabin. It degrades the experience for those of us who actually pay full fare." Malcolm didn't move. He stood there, duffel bag in hand, his expression patient. "I did pay full fare, ma'am, 3 weeks ago. The reservation is confirmed." Victoria's blue eyes narrowed. She looked him up and down, slowly taking in the hoodie, the sneakers, the battered bag. Her lip curled slightly. "Sweetie, I've been flying first class for 15 years. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. And you don't belong here." From seat 2. A white man in his mid-30s named Eric Caldwell quietly pulled out his smartphone. He'd been watching the interaction unfold with growing discomfort, and now he hit the record button. His camera captured everything: the condescension in Victoria's posture, the calm dignity in Malcolm's stance, the Hermes Birkin bag she'd placed in seat 1B to claim it as her own. "This is going to go viral," Eric whispered to himself, angling the phone to get a clear shot of both their faces. "Before this goes any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you've ever been judged by your appearance before people knew who you really were, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because what's about to unfold at 40,000 feet will remind you that true power doesn't need a designer label to make its presence known. Now, let's rewind 3 hours to see how we got here. Earlier that morning, the Aerolux first-class lounge at JFK International Airport had been a sanctuary of leather armchairs, muted jazz, and complimentary top-shelf liquor. Victoria Ashford sat near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked tarmac, her MacBook open, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what their legal team says, Gregory," she said sharply into the phone. "We push the acquisition through by Friday. The proxy votes are secured. Durant Global doesn't know what's coming." She took a sip of her second glass of champagne, her eyes scanning a confidential presentation on her screen. The target company's financials were laid out in ruthless detail: assets to liquidate, divisions to spin off, employees to terminate. "Their CEO is a relic," she continued. "Malcolm Durant built that company 30 years ago and still thinks loyalty matters more than profit. We're going to strip it for parts and walk away with a 40% return." Across the lounge, partially hidden by a potted fern, Malcolm Durant sat in a corner booth. He wore the same charcoal hoodie he'd have on for the flight, the same scuffed sneakers. A battered paperback novel rested on the table beside a complimentary banana. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't checking emails. He was simply sitting, watching, listening. Victoria's voice carried easily across the lounge. She wasn't trying to be discreet. Why would she? She was surrounded by fellow elites, people who understood that business was war and sentiment was weakness. When the boarding call for Flight 614 to London Heathrow finally chimed over the PA system, Victoria gathered her things with brisk efficiency. She walked past Malcolm without a second glance, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Malcolm stood slowly, picked up his canvas duffel, and followed at a distance. Neither of them knew it yet, but the next 7 hours would change both their lives forever. Victoria was about to learn that the quiet man she dismissed as beneath her notice was the very person she'd spent months plotting to destroy. And Malcolm was about to remind her that underestimating someone based on how they dress is the fastest way to dismantle your own empire. The Boeing 787 waited on the tarmac, engines humming, ready to carry them both toward a reckoning. Victoria Ashford had built her career on one simple philosophy: dominate or be dominated. At 42, she was a senior partner at Ashford and Klein LLP, one of the most feared corporate litigation firms in New York. Her specialty was hostile takeovers, helping private equity vultures strip companies down to their bones and sell the scraps for profit. She had a corner office on the 38th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. She drove a Mercedes S-Class. She owned a brownstone in the West Village that she'd paid for in cash. And she flew first class on every single flight, racking up over 200 trips a year. Victoria didn't just value wealth, she worshipped it. To her, money was the only reliable measure of a person's worth. If you were rich, you mattered. If you weren't, you didn't. It was that simple. She had no patience for people who talked about ethics or fairness or community responsibility. Those were luxuries for people who didn't understand how the world actually worked. The strong took what they wanted. The weak complained about it afterward. Victoria had chosen her side a long time ago. This trip to London was the pinnacle of everything she'd worked toward. Her client, Whitmore Capital, was a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring struggling companies, slashing costs, and flipping them for massive profit. Their current target was Durant Global Holdings, a $12 billion multinational conglomerate that owned Airline's aerospace leasing divisions, commercial real estate, and logistics networks across 6 continents. The plan was elegant in its brutality. Whitmore had quietly purchased 31% of Durant Global's voting shares through a web of shell corporations. They'd spent 18 months courting board members, offering consulting fees and promises of lucrative positions at other companies. On Friday morning, they would call an emergency board meeting and force a restructuring, a corporate euphemism for gutting the company and firing thousands of employees. Victoria's role was to provide legal cover. She'd drafted the proposals, structured the shell companies, and prepared the justifications for liquidating the employee pension fund to pay down acquisition debt. It was all technically legal, if morally reprehensible, but morality didn't pay her $4 million bonus. As she boarded Flight 614 and made her way into the first-class cabin, she felt invincible. This deal would make her a legend in the corporate litigation world. She'd be profiled in Forbes, headhunted by even bigger firms. Maybe she'd even start her own practice. She reached seat 1A, the window suite at the very front of the aircraft, and smiled. This was her throne. Her reward for being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than everyone else. And then she saw him. A black man in a faded hoodie holding a canvas duffel bag, standing in the aisle and checking his boarding pass for seat 1B. Victoria's smile vanished. Her first thought was immediate and visceral. He doesn't belong here. She didn't question the thought. She didn't examine it. It simply felt true, the way gravity feels true. This man, dressed like he was heading to a basketball court, could not possibly afford a $28,000 first-class ticket. There had to be a mistake, so she said the words that would destroy her life. "Excuse me, this seat is taken. You need to move to economy where you belong." Malcolm Durant had heard those words before. Not the exact phrasing, but the sentiment behind them. The assumption that he didn't deserve to be in certain spaces, the belief that his appearance disqualified him from success. He was used to it. At 56, he'd spent 3 decades navigating rooms where people looked at his skin color and decided he was less capable, less intelligent, less worthy of respect. He'd learned long ago that anger was a waste of energy. Quiet competence was a far more effective weapon. Malcolm had founded Durant Global Holdings when he was 26 years old. His first contract had been a modest aerospace leasing deal worth $1.8 million, a single Boeing 737 leased to a regional carrier. He'd negotiated that deal in a borrowed suit carrying a briefcase his mother had given him, fueled by nothing but determination and sleepless nights. Over the next 30 years, he'd built that single contract into a global empire. 7 airlines, 43 commercial real estate properties, logistics networks spanning 4 continents, 47,000 employees across 22 countries. He'd done it without venture capital, without inherited wealth, without shortcuts, just relentless work, strategic vision, and an unshakable commitment to the people who worked for him. Malcolm believed that companies existed to serve their employees, not the other way around. He paid above-market wages. He offered generous benefits. He protected pensions even when Wall Street analysts told him it hurt shareholder value. He believed that if you took care of your people, they would take care of your business. It was an old-fashioned philosophy, increasingly rare in the era of private equity and quarterly earnings obsessions. But it worked. Durant Global had weathered the 2008 financial crisis without a single layoff. They'd survived the pandemic by protecting every job. Employee retention was the highest in their industry, and now someone was trying to destroy it. Malcolm had known about the Whitmore Capital takeover attempt for months. His intelligence network, former employees who'd moved into competitor firms, friendly board members, financial analysts who owed him favors, had been feeding him information since the shell corporations first started buying shares. He knew about the proxy votes. He knew about the bribed board members. He knew about Victoria Ashford and her meticulously planned legal strategy. He knew everything, and he'd been preparing his counterstrike. This trip to London wasn't a vacation. It was a declaration of war. Malcolm was flying to meet with his most loyal board members, his legal team, and a coalition of institutional investors who believed in his vision. By the time Whitmore Capital called their Friday meeting, they'd find that their proxy votes had been frozen, their shell corporations exposed, and their entire operation under investigation by securities regulators on 2 continents. But Victoria didn't know any of that. She looked at Malcolm and saw a man in a hoodie, a man who didn't belong, a man she could dismiss. It was the most expensive mistake she would ever make. Malcolm looked at her calmly, his boarding pass still in his hand. "Ma'am, this is my assigned seat. I have my boarding pass right here if you'd like to see it." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "I don't need to see anything. Look around you. This is first class on a transatlantic flight. Tickets for these seats cost $28,000. There's obviously been a system error." Malcolm didn't argue. He simply stood there waiting. He'd learned long ago that silence was often the most powerful response. Let people reveal themselves. Let them show you who they really are. And Victoria was more than happy to oblige. She turned slightly, addressing the passengers in row 2. "The airline has been cutting corners lately, letting anyone with an upgrade voucher or rewards points into the premium cabin. It degrades the experience for those of us who actually pay full fare." Eric Caldwell, sitting in 2A, shifted uncomfortably. He was a marketing executive from Boston flying to London for a conference. He'd been looking forward to a quiet flight, maybe catch up on some work, watch a movie. Instead, he was witnessing something ugly unfold in real time. He pulled out his phone and started recording. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with the footage, but instinct told him this moment needed to be documented. From the galley, Sophie Grant, a young flight attendant with barely 2 years of experience, watched the confrontation with growing alarm. She glanced toward the front of the cabin looking for Claudia Moreno, the lead flight attendant. Claudia had 20 years of experience. She'd know how to handle this. But Claudia was still in the cockpit running through pre-flight checks with the pilots. Sophie took a deep breath and approached. Her voice was polite but uncertain. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Victoria turned to her, relief washing over her face. "Finally, someone competent. Yes, there's a problem. This man is claiming to have a first-class ticket, and I'm quite certain there's been an error. Could you please verify his credentials and move him to his correct seat?" Sophie glanced at Malcolm. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Malcolm handed it over without hesitation. His expression remained calm, almost serene. Sophie scanned the barcode with her handheld device. She looked at the screen. Her eyes widened slightly. "Everything is in order, ma'am. Mr. Durant is a confirmed first-class passenger. His reservation has been in the system for 3 weeks." Victoria's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. Run it again." "Ma'am, I've already verified it. The ticket is valid. Then call the gate. There has to be an explanation." "Ma'am, the boarding door is about to close. If there were an issue with Mr. Durant's ticket, the gate agents would have caught it before he boarded." Victoria's face flushed with anger. She wasn't used to being contradicted. "Are you telling me you're going to allow this man to sit in first class despite my objections?" Sophie hesitated. "I'm telling you his ticket is valid, ma'am. I don't have grounds to move a ticketed passenger." Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Let me explain something to you. I am a Platinum Elite member of this airline. I fly over 200,000 miles a year. I have the CEO's personal cell phone number. If you don't fix this situation immediately, I will make sure you lose your job before we even take off." Sophie's face went pale. She looked at Malcolm, then back at Victoria. "I'll get the lead flight attendant." She hurried toward the cockpit, her hands shaking. Victoria turned back to Malcolm, her eyes cold. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not going to work. You're going to be moved one way or another." Malcolm finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Ma'am, I'm not playing any games. I'm simply trying to sit in the seat I paid for. If you have concerns about the airline's boarding procedures, I'd be happy to discuss them once we're in the air. But right now, I'd appreciate it if you'd move your bag so I can store my belongings and take my seat." Victoria stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, searching for a response that would reassert her dominance. But before she could find the words, a new voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Claudia Moreno had arrived. Claudia Moreno stood in the aisle with the posture of someone who had seen every conceivable passenger crisis and remained unflappable. At 38, she was the lead flight attendant on Flight 614, a position she'd earned through 2 decades of flawless service crisis management and an uncanny ability to diffuse conflicts before they escalated. She was Hispanic, with dark hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that quickly assessed the situation. Victoria's defensive posture, Malcolm's calm patience, Sophie's obvious distress, Eric filming from 2A. Claudia had dealt with entitled passengers before. She'd handled medical emergencies, unruly drunks, panic attacks, and once a man who'd tried to open the emergency exit mid-flight because he was feeling claustrophobic. This situation, while tense, was well within her capabilities. "I'm Claudia Moreno, the lead flight attendant." She extended her hand toward Victoria, professional and calm. "How can I help?" Victoria seized the opportunity. Finally, someone with authority. "Yes, there's a very serious problem. This man is attempting to sit in seat 1B, and I have significant concerns about whether his ticket is legitimate." Claudia turned to Malcolm. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Malcolm handed it to her without a word. Claudia scanned it with her device. She looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Malcolm's face, then back at the screen. Her expression remained neutral, But something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise carefully concealed. "Everything is in order, ma'am." Claudia's voice was professional but firm. "Mr. Durant is a confirmed first-class passenger. His ticket was purchased 3 weeks ago at full fare. There is no error." Victoria's hands clenched into fists. "That's what your colleague said, and I'm telling you it's impossible. Look at him. Does he look like someone who can afford a $28,000 ticket?" Claudia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, I can't evaluate passengers based on their appearance. Mr. Durant has a valid ticket. He's entitled to his seat." "Then there's something wrong with your verification system," Victoria snapped. "I want you to call the gate. I want you to verify his credit card. I want you to confirm that this ticket wasn't purchased with stolen information or fraudulent miles." Malcolm finally spoke, his voice still calm. "Ma'am, I'm happy to provide whatever verification you need. I can show you my credit card, my identification, my payment receipt. But I don't believe the flight crew is obligated to interrogate me simply because you find my clothing objectionable." Victoria's face flushed red. "This isn't about your clothing. This is about standards. This cabin is supposed to be reserved for people who have earned the right to be here. People who contribute to the economy, who run businesses, who actually matter." She gestured around the cabin as if appealing to an invisible jury. 20 years ago, first class meant something. It was exclusive. It was elite. Now the airlines let anyone in if they have enough credit card points or win some loyalty program lottery. It cheapens the entire experience for those of us who actually pay full fare. Eric Caldwell, still recording from 2A, zoomed in on Victoria's face. His live stream had been running for 3 minutes now, and the viewer count was climbing rapidly. 2,000, 5,000, 10,000. The comments section was exploding. "This is insane, Karen, at 40,000 feet. Did she really just say people who matter? Someone please tell me this guy sues her." Claudia took a slow breath, maintaining her composure. "Ma'am, I understand you have concerns, but Mr. Durant's ticket is legitimate. I've verified it twice. Unless you have evidence of fraud, I cannot remove a paying passenger from their assigned seat." Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Let me be very clear. I am a senior partner at Ashford & Klein. We represent clients with a combined net worth exceeding $20 billion. I have connections at the highest levels of this airline's corporate structure. If you allow this man to remain in this seat, I will personally ensure that you are terminated. Do I make myself clear?" Claudia's expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. "Ma'am, threatening flight crew is a violation of federal aviation regulations. I'm going to ask you one time to lower your voice and return to your seat. If you continue to be disruptive, I will be forced to report this incident to the captain." Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You're going to report me for objecting to the presence of someone who clearly doesn't belong here." She turned to Malcolm, her contempt undisguised. "Let me guess. You work at a call center, or maybe you drive for a rideshare company. You saved up your little rewards points for years, and now you think you get to sit with the adults." Malcolm met her gaze steadily. "I manage various investments. Let's just say I oversee a diversified portfolio." Victoria scoffed. "A diversified portfolio? That's adorable. You probably own 3 rental properties and think you're a real estate mogul." She pulled her tablet from her Hermes bag, tapping the screen aggressively. "Let me tell you what real wealth looks like. I'm flying to London to finalize a deal that will net my firm tens of millions in fees. We're executing a hostile takeover of a bloated, mismanaged dinosaur called Durant Global Holdings. Ever heard of it?" Malcolm's expression didn't change. "Can't say that I have." "Of course you haven't. It's a $12 billion multinational conglomerate, way out of your league. But here's what's going to make this deal legendary." She leaned back in her seat, warming to her topic. She loved having an audience, even one she considered beneath her. Durant Global was built by some old fool named Malcolm Durant. Started the company 30 years ago and somehow managed to grow it into this massive empire. Airlines, real estate logistics, aerospace leasing. Impressive, I'll admit. But the guy is weak. Sentimental. He actually believes in taking care of his employees, paying living wages, protecting pensions. It's pathetic. He treats his company like a charity instead of a profit-generating machine. Victoria pulled up a presentation on her tablet, her eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. So, here's what we're going to do. My clients have quietly acquired 31% of the company's voting shares through shell corporations. We've spent 18 months consulting with key board members. On Friday, we're calling an emergency meeting to force a restructuring. She scrolled through slides showing Malcolm the detailed breakdown. Phase 1. Terminate all C-suite executives loyal to Durant. Replace them with our people. Phase 2. Spin off the aerospace division. We already have buyers lined up. A Chinese conglomerate is offering $3.2 billion. Phase 3. Liquidate the commercial real estate portfolio. Durant owns properties in 14 countries. We'll sell everything, generate $4 billion in cash. Phase 4. And this is my favorite part, we redirect the employee pension fund. It's currently holding $800 million in assets. We'll use that money to finance the acquisition debt. Malcolm's hands, resting calmly on his armrests, tightened almost imperceptibly. But his face remained neutral. And what happens to the employees whose pensions you're planning to liquidate? He asked quietly. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. Not my problem. Look, I'm not heartless. I understand that some people will lose their jobs, but that's the cost of progress. The market rewards efficiency, and the most efficient thing we can do is strip out all the sentimental garbage, employee benefits, community programs, sustainability initiatives, and extract maximum value for shareholders. She looked at Malcolm with something resembling pity. Malcolm Durant's biggest mistake was caring about his workers. He treated them like family. And that weakness is going to destroy him. The cabin had gone completely silent. Even the ambient hum of the aircraft's system seemed muted. Every passenger within earshot was listening, transfixed by Victoria's casual cruelty. Eric's live stream had reached 50,000 viewers. The comments were no longer just shocked, they were furious. From the galley, Sophie watched with wide eyes. She'd only been flying for 2 years, but she'd never seen anything like this. Claudia stood perfectly still, her professional mask firmly in place. But inside, she was horrified. She'd recognized Malcolm's name the moment she scanned his boarding pass. She knew exactly who he was, and she was watching him be verbally assaulted by a woman who had no idea she was bragging about destroying his life's work to his face. Malcolm leaned forward slightly. Ms. Ashford, may I call you Victoria? Victoria shrugged. Sure. Let me ask you something. Do you believe that companies have any responsibility to their employees beyond maximizing profit? Victoria laughed. Absolutely not. A company's only responsibility is to its shareholders. Everything else, employee welfare, community investment, environmental sustainability, those are just marketing narratives to make consumers feel good. The truth is, the only people who matter in business are the ones who own capital. Workers are replaceable. Assets are fungible. Loyalty is a fairy tale. She gestured at Malcolm with her tablet. I know that sounds harsh to someone like you. You probably think your boss cares about you, that if you work hard enough, you'll get ahead. But that's the lie they sell to keep people compliant. The reality is you're disposable, and the sooner you accept that, the less disappointed you'll be when you inevitably get replaced by someone cheaper. Malcolm nodded slowly, as though considering her words carefully. That's certainly one philosophy. Very Darwinian. It's the only philosophy that survives in the real world, Victoria said. Sentiment is a luxury for people who don't have to make hard decisions. I make hard decisions every day. And I sleep just fine at night. Even when those decisions destroy thousands of lives, Victoria met his gaze without flinching. Especially then, because I know that I'm doing what needs to be done. I'm making the market more efficient. I'm rewarding capital allocation. I'm ensuring that resources flow to their most productive use. If some people get hurt in the process, that's unfortunate. But it's also inevitable. The world doesn't owe anyone a comfortable life. You earn what you get, and if you're not strong enough to compete, then you deserve to fail. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, I hope you never have to learn how wrong you are, Ms. Ashford, because that's a lesson that destroys people. Victoria laughed again. I'm not worried. I'm on the winning side. The Boeing 787's engines roared to life. The aircraft began its taxi toward the runway. Victoria settled back into her seat, satisfied that she'd put this presumptuous stranger in his place. Malcolm opened his paperback novel and began to read, his face expressionless. But in his pocket, his phone vibrated with incoming messages. Arthur Brennan, his COO in London, had received Malcolm's encrypted instructions and was already executing Protocol Omega. The war had begun. Victoria just didn't know it yet. As the Boeing 787 leveled off at cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign chimed off, Malcolm stared out the window at the clouds stretching endlessly below. The cabin lights had dimmed to a soothing blue, and most passengers were settling in with movies or books or sleep. But Malcolm couldn't relax. Victoria's words echoed in his mind. People like him don't belong here. Workers are disposable. Loyalty is a fairy tale. For a moment, he wasn't in seat 1B on a state-of-the-art Dreamliner. He was 24 years old again, standing in a different first-class cabin, holding a ticket he'd saved 6 months to afford. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. It was 1992. Malcolm had just closed his first major contract, a $1.8 million aerospace leasing deal with a regional carrier in Dallas. It was the culmination of 2 years of brutal work, 80-hour weeks, countless rejections, and a determination that bordered on obsession. He'd celebrated by doing something he'd dreamed about since childhood, buying a first-class ticket. The flight was American Airlines New York to Dallas. Malcolm wore his best suit purchased at a Macy's clearance sale and carried a leather briefcase his mother had given him when he graduated from Howard University. He felt like he was floating as he walked down the jet bridge. Seat 3A, window seat. He'd requested it specifically. Malcolm settled into the plush leather, barely able to contain his excitement. He'd worked so hard for this moment. Every sacrifice, every late night, every time he'd been told he wasn't good enough, it had all led here. He was succeeding. He was winning. A white businessman in his 50s sat down in 3B, wearing an expensive suit and gold cufflinks. The man glanced at Malcolm, frowned, and immediately pressed the call button. A flight attendant arrived within seconds. Yes, sir. The man gestured at Malcolm without looking at him directly. There's been a seating error. This is first class. I think this young man is in the wrong section. Malcolm's chest tightened. Excuse me. The flight attendant looked at Malcolm apologetically. Sir, may I see your boarding pass? Malcolm handed it over, his hands starting to shake. This is my seat. I paid for it. The businessman cut in sharply. That's impossible. He probably found someone's discarded ticket or used a fraudulent credit card. I've been flying first class for 20 years. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. The flight attendant looked from Malcolm to the businessman, clearly uncomfortable. Sir, I'm going to need to verify your payment method with the gate. Would you mind coming with me? Malcolm felt heat rising in his face. I can show you my credit card receipt right now. That won't be necessary, sir. Please follow me. She escorted him off the plane in front of the entire first-class cabin. 30 pairs of eyes watching. Some sympathetic, most indifferent, a few openly smirking. Malcolm stood at the gate counter for 20 minutes while they verified his payment. The gate agent made phone calls, checked his credit card, ran his identification through multiple systems. Finally, she looked up. "Sir, your ticket is valid. However, we've decided to reseat you in the main cabin for your comfort and safety." "My comfort." Malcolm's voice cracked. "You're moving me because that man complained. Sir, we're trying to avoid any further disruption to the flight." They reseated him in economy row 32, middle seat squeezed between a broken tray table and a crying infant. His briefcase sat on his lap for the entire 3-hour flight because there was no overhead space left. Malcolm stared at the seat back in front of him, his vision blurring. He didn't cry. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But he made a promise to himself that night, somewhere over Pennsylvania, at 35,000 feet. "One day I won't just sit in first class. I'll own the entire airline." Over the next 3 decades, Malcolm kept that promise. He didn't just own one airline. He owned 7. He bought the Boeing jets they flew. He owned the terminals they operated from. He built an empire so large that the man who'd had him removed from that flight probably flew on Malcolm's planes without ever knowing it. But the memory never faded. The humiliation never fully healed. And now, 32 years later, sitting across from Victoria Ashford, Malcolm felt that same rage-controlled, focused patient. She was that businessman in 3B. She was every person who'd ever looked at him and decided he didn't deserve to be in the room. The difference was, this time Malcolm wasn't a struggling entrepreneur with a single contract and a Macy's suit. He was a billionaire with the resources to fight back, and Victoria Ashford had just handed him every piece of ammunition he needed. Malcolm blinked, the memory fading as the present came back into focus. He was 56 now, gray-streaked hair, worn hoodie canvas bag, but he'd kept his promise. He glanced over at Victoria. She was typing on her tablet, completely absorbed in her emails, utterly oblivious to who was sitting 3 feet away. History wasn't repeating itself, Malcolm thought. This time, he controlled the ending. He pulled out his phone and opened the encrypted messaging app. Arthur Brennan had sent an update Protocol Omega fully operational. FSA raids begin in 90 minutes. High Court injunction approved. Press briefing scheduled. She's finished, Malcolm. Absolutely finished. Malcolm typed back, "Good. Make sure it's public, every detail." He hit send and put the phone away. Then he went back to reading his book, calm as still water. 2 hours into the flight, Claudia Moreno returned to the first-class cabin with dinner menus. The cabin lights had shifted to a warm amber glow, and most passengers were relaxing with drinks or entertainment systems. Claudia approached Malcolm's seat first, her demeanor noticeably warmer than it had been during the boarding confrontation. "Good evening, Mr. Durant." She spoke quietly, her voice carrying a subtle tone of respect. "We have seared Chilean sea bass with lemon beurre blanc or Wagyu beef fillet with truffle reduction. Which would you prefer?" "The sea bass sounds wonderful, Claudia. Thank you." Claudia smiled genuinely. "I'll have that out to you shortly." Victoria, who'd been watching the interaction from seat 1A, felt a spike of irritation. She'd noticed the shift in Claudia's tone. The flight attendant had been coldly professional with her, but warm with this man in the hoodie. "Excuse me," Victoria's voice cut through the quiet. "Did you just call him Mr. Durant?" Claudia turned her professional mask, sliding back into place. "Yes, ma'am. That's his name." "Durant." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What's his full name? I'm not permitted to share passenger information, ma'am." Victoria's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking for his social security number. I just want to know if his first name is Malcolm." Claudia hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Victoria to notice. "I really can't disclose that, ma'am." Victoria turned to look directly at Malcolm, studying his face with new intensity. She'd been so focused on his clothing, so convinced of his insignificance that she hadn't really looked at him before. "Are you related to Malcolm Durant, the CEO of Durant Global Holdings?" Malcolm smiled gently. "What an interesting coincidence that would be." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed through the cabin. "Don't flatter yourself. Malcolm Durant is a billionaire. He's profiled in Forbes. He gives keynote speeches at Davos. You're wearing a hoodie from a discount store." She turned back to Claudia, waving her hand dismissively. "I'll have the Wagyu medium rare. And make sure it's actually medium rare this time, not medium. Last month on this route, your chef overcooked my steak. I had to send it back." "Right away, ma'am." Claudia's tone had gone flat again. As Claudia walked back toward the galley, Victoria couldn't quite shake the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. Durant wasn't a common name, and there had been something in Claudia's hesitation, something in the way she'd addressed him with such careful respect. But no, it was impossible. Malcolm Durant wouldn't fly commercial, wouldn't dress like a college student, wouldn't sit quietly while being insulted. Billionaires didn't behave that way. Victoria dismissed the thought and returned to her tablet. She had work to do. The Friday board meeting required final preparations. She pulled up her presentation and began reviewing the acquisition timeline, the shell corporation structure, the planned liquidations. After a few minutes, she glanced over at Malcolm again. He was reading his paperback novel, seemingly at peace. An idea occurred to her, malicious, self-indulgent, but irresistible. She wanted to gloat. She wanted to explain to this nobody just how impressive she was, just how powerful the deal she was executing really was. "You know," she said loud enough to carry across the aisle, "since you share a last name with my target, maybe you'll appreciate the brilliance of what we're about to pull off." Malcolm looked up from his book. "I'm listening." Victoria pulled up her presentation, angling the tablet so he could see. Malcolm Durant built Durant Global Holdings over 30 years ago. Started with a single aerospace leasing contract. Grew it into a $12 billion empire. Airlines, real estate, logistics. The whole package. Pretty impressive, I'll admit. She scrolled to the next slide. But here's his fatal flaw. He stayed private too long. Didn't take the company public until 2019. By then, he'd lost control through early investor agreements and stock distributions. He only controls 35% of voting shares. That makes him vulnerable. Malcolm's expression remained neutral. "Go on." Victoria warmed to her topic. "My clients at Whitmore Capital have been quietly buying shares through shell corporations for 18 months. We now control 31%. Add in the board members we've been courting, and we have enough votes to force a restructuring." She showed Malcolm a detailed organizational chart. Durant's board has 7 members. 3 are old-school loyalists who'll never vote against him, but the other 4. We've been wining and dining them for months. Consulting fees, promises of board seats at other companies. 2 of them are already deeply in debt and desperate. They'll vote however we tell them. "And what exactly are you proposing to restructure?" Malcolm asked quietly. Victoria grinned. "Everything." She pulled up a slide titled Value Extraction Strategy. Phase 1 happens immediately after we take control. We terminate the CEO and the entire C-suite. Malcolm Durant, his CFO, his COO, his general counsel, all gone. We replace them with interim executives from Whitmore, who'll do exactly what we say. Phase 2. We spin off the aerospace division. It's the crown jewel of the company. We already have a buyer lined up, Shenzhen Aviation Industries. They're offering $3.2 billion. Durant would never sell to them because he's worried about intellectual property and American jobs. But we don't care about any of that. We care about cash. Malcolm's hands tightened on his book, but his face remained impassive. Phase 3. Liquidate the commercial real estate portfolio. Durant owns office buildings, warehouses, and distribution centers in 14 countries. Combined value approximately $4 billion. We'll sell everything to the highest bidders, probably private equity funds that'll flip them within a year. Victoria scrolled to the next slide, her eyes gleaming. Phase 4 is my personal favorite. Durant Global has an employee pension fund holding $800 million in assets. It's fully funded, well-managed, one of the best in the industry. Malcolm Durant is very proud of it. She leaned forward conspiratorially. We're going to liquidate it. Redirect those assets to pay down the acquisition debt. Legally, we can justify it as a necessary restructuring expense. The employees will lose their pensions, but that's not our problem. They should have planned better for retirement. Malcolm's voice when he spoke was very soft. You're going to destroy the retirement security of 20,000 people to pay for your acquisition. Victoria shrugged. I'm optimizing capital allocation. The pension fund is an inefficient use of resources. Those $800 million will generate much higher returns if we redirect them toward more productive investments. And the employees whose lives you're destroying. Victoria's expression hardened. Look, I know this sounds cold to someone like you. You probably believe that companies should take care of their workers, that there's some kind of social contract. But that's naive. She set down her tablet and looked at Malcolm directly. Let me explain how the real world works. Companies exist to maximize shareholder value. Period. Not to provide jobs, not to support communities, not to make the world a better place. Those are nice talking points for PR departments, but they're not the actual purpose of business. Malcolm Durant's biggest mistake was believing his own propaganda. He actually thinks his employees are like family, that loyalty matters, that treating people well will protect his company. She laughed bitterly. It won't. The moment a better offer comes along, employees jump ship. The moment a competitor undercuts your prices, customers disappear. Loyalty is a fairy tale we tell ourselves to feel better about the fundamentally transactional nature of all human relationships. You sound very certain of that. I am certain. I've worked in corporate law for 20 years. I've overseen dozens of acquisitions, hostile and friendly, and I've learned one universal truth. Sentiment is weakness. The second you start caring about your employees as people rather than as assets you've already lost. She gestured at the cabin around them. Malcolm Durant treats his company like a charity. He pays above market wages. He offers generous benefits. He refuses to outsource jobs even when it would save millions. He protects pensions even though it hurts profitability. That's not business. That's a hobby. And now it's going to cost him everything he built. Malcolm closed his book carefully. Ms. Ashford, do you have any regrets about the lives you're about to disrupt? Regrets? Victoria looked genuinely puzzled by the question. No. Why would 20,000 people will lose their jobs? Families will be destroyed. Retirees who worked their entire lives will see their security evaporate overnight. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. That's a very emotional way to frame a simple business decision. Yes, some people will be negatively affected. That's unfortunate. But it's also inevitable. The economy will absorb them. Some will find new jobs. Some will retire early. Some will adapt. That's how capitalism works. The strong survive. The weak get displaced. I'm not responsible for which category people fall into. Malcolm leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something. If you found out that one of those 20,000 employees was someone you knew personally, a family member, a friend, would that change your perspective? Victoria considered the question seriously. Honestly, no. Because my job isn't to make decisions based on personal feelings. My job is to extract maximum value for my clients. If someone I knew happened to work for Durant Global, I'd feel bad for them personally. But I'd still execute the deal exactly the same way. She met Malcolm's gaze without flinching. That's the difference between professionals and amateurs. Amateurs let emotion cloud their judgment. Professionals do what needs to be done, regardless of how it makes them feel. Malcolm nodded slowly. And you sleep well at night, like a baby. Because I know that I'm doing my job to the best of my ability. I'm not a bad person, Mr. Durant, or whatever your name is. I'm just a realist. The world is a competitive place. Resources are finite. Someone is going to win and someone is going to lose. I've chosen to be on the winning side." She picked up her champagne glass, taking a long sip. "And by Friday afternoon, I'll have helped my clients execute one of the most profitable acquisitions of the decade. Malcolm Durant will be forced out of his own company. 20,000 employees will be restructured. And I'll receive a $4 million bonus." Victoria smiled. "You asked if I have regrets. I don't. I have a career I'm proud of, wealth I've earned, and the satisfaction of knowing I'm the best at what I do." Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very gently, "I hope you enjoy the next few hours, Ms. Ashford, because I suspect your perspective is about to change rather dramatically." Victoria laughed. "Is that a threat?" "Not at all. Just an observation." The Boeing 787 hit a patch of turbulence and the aircraft shuddered. Victoria's champagne glass tipped spilling onto her cashmere dress. She cursed, grabbing napkins from the side console. Damn it, this dress cost $3,000. Her tablet, which had been resting on her tray table, slid off and clattered to the floor. The screen spiderwebbed with cracks. No, Victoria scrambled to pick it up, her carefully manicured nails scraping against the carpet. That tablet had all of her confidential files, acquisition timelines, shell corporation structures, board member correspondence, everything. She picked it up, her hands shaking slightly. The screen was badly damaged but still partially functional. She could make out some of the text, but half the display was black. If any of those files leaked because of this incompetent flight crew, I'll sue the airline into bankruptcy, she muttered. Malcolm observed quietly. You might want to be more careful about storing sensitive information on unsecured personal devices. Corporate espionage laws are quite strict. Victoria glared at him. What would you know about corporate espionage laws? I've dealt with a few hostile takeovers in my time. Malcolm's tone was mild, almost helpful. I know how these things work. Really? Victoria's voice dripped with sarcasm. And what company do you run? I didn't say I run a company. I said I've dealt with hostile takeovers. As a paralegal? A compliance officer at some regional bank? Malcolm smiled faintly. Something like that. Victoria shook her head, already losing interest. She turned her attention back to her damaged tablet, trying to salvage her files. As she bent down to gather scattered papers that had fallen during the turbulence, a single business card slipped from her bag and slid under Malcolm's seat. Malcolm reached down and picked it up. The card read, Victoria Ashford, Senior Partner, Corporate Litigation, Ashford and Klein L., LP, and handwritten on the back, Durant Board Meeting, Friday, 9 a.m., Canary Wharf. Malcolm looked at the card for a moment. Then he discreetly photographed it with his phone before handing it back to Victoria. I believe you dropped this. Victoria snatched it from his hand without looking at him. Don't touch my things. She shoved it back into her bag, completely oblivious to the fact that Malcolm had already documented it. Malcolm placed his phone face down on the armrest and opened an encrypted messaging app. He typed quickly, his thumbs moving with practiced efficiency. To Arthur Brennan. Arthur Victoria Ashford is more brazen than we anticipated. She's detailed the entire acquisition strategy to me verbally, including specific asset liquidations, pension fund redirection, and board member bribery. Accelerate Protocol Omega. I want the following executed before we land one. FSA and SEC raids on all Whitmore Capital offices simultaneously. London, New York, Hong Kong. 2. Emergency High Court injunction, freezing all proxy votes. Ground securities fraud and corporate espionage. 3. Leak the acquisition details to Financial Times and Wall Street Journal. Full exposure. Make sure they mention the pension fund liquidation explicitly. 4. Contact the 4 board members Ashford has been bribing. Offer them immunity in exchange for cooperation and resignation. 5. Notify Metropolitan Police to meet the flight at Heathrow. I want Ashford detained for questioning immediately upon landing. 6. And Arthur call Captain Mitchell. Tell him it's time for the announcement. We're done playing defense. It's time Victoria learned exactly who she's been lecturing for the past 3 hours. Malcolm. He hit send. The message encrypted and vanished into the digital ether. Within seconds, Arthur responded. Message received. Protocol Omega escalating to full offensive. FSA already en route to Whitmore offices. We had them on standby. High Court judge signing injunction now. Press briefings in 30 minutes. Captain Mitchell standing by for your signal. He's been briefed. Malcolm, she has no idea what's about to hit her. This is going to be spectacular. Arthur. Malcolm allowed himself a small smile. He put the phone away and returned to his book. Across the aisle, Victoria had finally managed to stabilize her cracked tablet. She was typing furiously, sending emails to her team, making final preparations for the Friday meeting that would never happen. She was completely absorbed in her work, completely confident, completely oblivious. An hour later, Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen. Gregory Palmer, her managing partner at Ashford & Klein. She answered, keeping her voice low. Gregory, I'm on a flight. This better be important. She listened. Her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to something approaching alarm. What do you mean the FSA is at our office? What? No, that's impossible. We have attorney-client privilege. They can't just... She fell silent, listening. Her face went pale. How many agents? 15. Gregory, what the hell is happening? Another long pause. Our computers. All of them on what grounds? Her hand started to shake. Whitmore Capital. What about them? The color drained completely from her face. They're raiding Whitmore too. Right now? Gregory, we have a board meeting on Friday. If this investigation becomes public before... She stopped mid-sentence. It's already public. What do you mean it's already public? She pulled up a news app on her cracked tablet screen. The Wall Street Journal homepage loaded, and the headline hit her like a physical blow. Hostile takeover of Durant. Global exposed FSA raids Whitmore Capital offices. Investigators allege securities fraud, bribery, and planned pension fund theft. Victoria's vision blurred. She scrolled down reading fragments. Shell corporations used to illegally accumulate proxy votes. Evidence of systematic board member bribery. Planned liquidation of $800 million employee pension fund. Senior partner Victoria Ashford identified as legal architect. Her phone slipped from her hand. She sat frozen, staring at nothing as the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. Malcolm turned a page in his book, calm as still water. The Boeing 787 began its gradual descent toward London. The cabin lights shifted to a warm amber glow, and passengers stirred from sleep or closed their laptops in preparation for landing. Victoria sat motionless in seat 1. Her cracked tablet resting on her lap. Her phone clutched in her hand. She'd spent the last 30 minutes frantically calling colleagues, trying to understand what was happening, trying to find a way to contain the damage. But there was no containing it. The story was everywhere. CNN, BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters. Every major news outlet was covering the raid, the investigation, the allegations. Her name was in every article. Victoria Ashford, senior partner at Ashford & Klein, identified as the legal architect of the fraudulent acquisition scheme. She felt sick. This couldn't be happening. She'd been so careful. The shell corporations were layered untraceable. The board member bribes were structured as legitimate consulting fees. The pension fund liquidation was legally defensible under corporate restructuring statutes. How had they found out? Her mind raced through possibilities. A whistleblower at Whitmore, a board member with cold feet, a leak from inside her own firm. She glanced across the aisle at Malcolm. He was reading peacefully, completely detached from the crisis unfolding around them. For a fleeting moment, Victoria felt a surge of irrational anger toward him. This man, this nobody in his cheap hoodie, represented everything that had gone wrong with the world. He'd sat there for hours, forcing her to share space with someone who didn't belong, while her entire career was collapsing. The seatbelt sign chimed on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James Mitchell from the flight deck." Victoria barely registered the announcement. She was staring at her phone, watching her professional reputation disintegrate in real time. "We're beginning our final descent into London Heathrow. Local time is 6:47 a.m. We should be on the ground in approximately 30 minutes. Captain Mitchell's voice was warm, authoritative, the kind of voice that made passengers feel safe. "Before I go through the landing procedures, I want to take a moment to acknowledge a very special passenger traveling with us this morning." Victoria looked up, mildly curious despite her distress. Maybe there was a celebrity on board, some distraction from the nightmare. As many of you may know, this aircraft is part of the Durant Global Aviation Fleet, operated under lease from Durant Aerospace Holdings. Victoria's attention sharpened. Durant Global Holdings is one of the world's largest aerospace leasing and transportation companies, with operations across 6 continents and 47,000 employees worldwide. Victoria's hand started to shake. "It is my profound honor to inform you that the founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Durant Global Holdings is seated with us in the first-class cabin this morning." No. The word formed in Victoria's mind, but no sound came out. "On behalf of our entire flight crew and the 47,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on his leadership, I want to extend a heartfelt welcome to Mr. Malcolm Durant, seated in Suite 1B. The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute, heavy, crushing. Victoria's head turned slowly, mechanically toward Seat 1B. Malcolm looked back at her with the same gentle, grandfatherly expression he'd worn since boarding. But now there was something else in his eyes. Not anger, not triumph. Just quiet, inevitable authority. The authority of a man who owned the ground beneath your feet. Sir Captain Mitchell continued, his voice warm with genuine respect. "Thank you for everything you do for us and for the industry. We're honored to have you aboard. We'll have you on the ground shortly, and your car is waiting on the tarmac as requested." Malcolm pressed the intercom button on his console. His voice, when it came through the cabin speakers, was deep, resonant, and completely different from the soft-spoken tone he'd used with Victoria. "Thank you, Captain Mitchell. The crew has been exemplary as always. Please give my regards to the entire team. Safe landing." The PA system clicked off. Victoria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Her mind was fracturing, trying to process the impossible reality unfolding before her. The man in the hoodie. The man she'd insulted, belittled, tried to have removed. The man she'd spent 3 hours bragging to about dismantling his company. Malcolm Durant. The CEO she'd spent 18 months plotting to destroy. "You." Victoria's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "You're..." Malcolm turned to face her fully. He set down his book. "Malcolm Durant, founder and CEO of Durant Global Holdings. The dinosaur you've been planning to dismantle. The old fool who believes in employee loyalty and treating workers like family." He gestured toward her cracked tablet. "The one whose pension fund you intended to liquidate, whose employees you were eager to fire, whose life's work you planned to strip for parts and sell to the highest bidder." Victoria's face had gone from pale to gray. She looked like she might faint or vomit or both. "I believe you said I was weak and sentimental, that I wouldn't recognize my own company once you were finished with it." Malcolm's tone remained gentle, but every word landed with the force of a hammer. You described in explicit detail how you plan to bribe my board members, liquidate my real estate holdings, sell my aerospace division to a Chinese conglomerate, and steal $800 million from my employees' retirement fund. He leaned forward slightly. You did all of this while sitting 3 feet away from me because you were so certain that someone dressed like me couldn't possibly be anyone important. Victoria tried to speak. Her lips moved, but no words came. Well, Ms. Ashford, Malcolm said quietly, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you try. He picked up his book and returned to reading as calm and composed as he'd been for the entire flight. Victoria sat frozen, her world collapsing around her while the Boeing 787 descended through the clouds toward London. Victoria couldn't move. She sat paralyzed in seat 1A, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the armrests, her breathing shallow and rapid. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. She'd wake up any moment back in her West Village brownstone, and this entire flight would be a stress-induced fever dream. But the engine's roar was real. The descent pressure in her ears was real, and Malcolm Durant, sitting 3 feet away in his faded hoodie, was devastatingly, irreversibly real. Mr. Durant, I wasn't... Victoria's voice cracked. The carefully constructed confidence that had defined her entire adult life shattered like her tablet screen. Those things I said it was strategy talk. Hypothetical scenarios, attorney-client work product. I would never actually. Hypothetical. Malcolm's voice was soft, but it cut through her panic like a blade. He pulled out his phone and opened the encrypted message thread with Arthur. He didn't show her the messages themselves, but he turned the screen so she could see the timestamp. I've been documenting this conversation since the moment you started bragging about your biggest deal ever. Every word, every specific detail. The shell corporations, the bribed board members, the pension fund liquidation. Victoria's breathing quickened. Her hands clutched at the armrests. You can't. That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent. Malcolm's expression didn't change. In New York, perhaps you'd have an argument. But we've been flying through international airspace under British jurisdiction for the past 6 hours. And in the UK, I'm perfectly within my rights to record someone making criminal threats against my company. He set the phone down on his console. Corporate espionage, Ms. Ashford. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Attempted theft of trade secrets. Bribery of corporate officers. Each charge carries significant prison time. Victoria felt the bile rise in her throat. I have attorney-client privilege. Everything I said was in preparation for legal representation of my client. Malcolm shook his head slowly. Attorney-client privilege doesn't cover criminal conspiracy. The moment you started discussing bribing board members and illegally liquidating pension funds, you crossed the line from legal strategy to criminal activity. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. Besides, you weren't discussing legal strategy with your client. You were gloating to a stranger you thought was beneath you, a stranger you assumed would never matter, a stranger you believed didn't belong in your space. Victoria's vision blurred with tears. She was not a woman who cried. She was not a woman who broke. But the foundation of her entire identity, her intelligence, her competence, her invincibility had been ripped away. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know who you were. I know you didn't. Malcolm's voice held no sympathy. That's exactly the problem. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong, not because of anything I said or did, but because of how I was dressed. Because I'm black. Because I didn't fit your narrow definition of what success looks like. He paused, letting the words sink in. And then you compounded that prejudice by detailing your plan to destroy the lives of 47,000 people you've never met. People with families. People with mortgages and car payments and college tuitions. People who've worked for me for decades, who've built their futures on the promise that if they did good work, they'd be taken care of. Malcolm's voice hardened. You were going to erase all of that. Not because it made sound business sense, but because you could. Because hurting people didn't matter to you as long as you got your $4 million bonus. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but movement in the aisle caught her attention. Eric Caldwell from seat 2A was standing holding his phone up, still recording. Mr. Durant, I don't know if you're aware, but I've been live streaming this entire interaction since boarding. Eric's voice carried through the quiet cabin. The live stream just hit 1.2 million viewers. Twitter, TikTok, Reddit. Everyone's watching. The hashtag, first class. Justice is trending worldwide. Malcolm nodded to him. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I appreciate you documenting this. Eric grinned, but there was something serious in his eyes. Sir, can I just say, watching justice happen in real time at 40,000 feet is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. You handled this with more grace than most people could manage. Victoria's head snapped toward Eric. You live-streamed me. You can't do that. I'll sue you for invasion of privacy. Eric laughed. Ma'am, we're in a public space. You were speaking loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. I didn't invade anything you broadcast yourself. He showed her his phone screen. Look, you're already a meme. Corporate lawyer gets grounded. How to destroy your career in 7 hours. Karma at cruising altitude. Someone made a remix of you saying people like him don't belong here over a trap beat. It has 3 million plays already. Victoria felt like she was drowning. The walls were closing in. The oxygen was disappearing. From the galley, Claudia Moreno and Sophie Grant watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. Claudia stepped forward, approaching Malcolm's seat. Mr. Durant, I owe you an apology. Her voice was steady, but carried genuine emotion. When Miss Ashford first complained about you during boarding, I should have shut it down immediately. I hesitated because I was worried about negative feedback from a high-status passenger. I prioritized her comfort over doing what was right. I failed you, and I failed every passenger who shouldn't have had to witness that behavior. Malcolm stood and extended his hand. Claudia shook it, surprised by the gesture. Claudia, you handled an impossible situation with professionalism and grace. You verified my ticket when asked. You maintained composure under pressure. You did your job exactly as you should have. But, sir, no buts. Malcolm's tone was firm but kind. Part of protecting my company means recognizing the people who uphold our values when it's difficult. You did that today. He pulled out his phone and typed quickly. I'm authorizing a $5,000 bonus for your professionalism under pressure. You'll see it in your next paycheck. And I'm putting a commendation in your file. You're an asset to this airline, Claudia. Claudia's eyes widened. Sir, that's not necessary. It absolutely is. Malcolm smiled. Excellence should be rewarded. Always. Sophie stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Durant, can I say something? Of course. My father worked for Durant Global for 28 years. He was a logistics coordinator at the Dallas hub. He retired 3 years ago. Sophie's voice wavered. His pension is what's keeping my parents in their house. It's paying for my mom's medical treatments. If Ms. Ashford had succeeded, if she'd liquidated that fund. She couldn't finish the sentence. Malcolm touched her shoulder gently. Your father's pension is safe, Sophie. And so are the pensions of every current and former employee of Durant Global. That was never negotiable. From row 3, an elderly white man stood up. He had silver hair and wore a business suit that had seen better days. Excuse me, Mr. Durant. My name is Henry Walsh. He extended his hand, and Malcolm shook it. I need to apologize. I sat here for 3 hours listening to that woman insult you, and I didn't say a word. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I shouldn't get involved. Henry's voice broke slightly. But that's how these things persist, isn't it? Good people staying silent. I'm ashamed. I should have spoken up. Malcolm gripped his hand firmly. Mr. Walsh, you're speaking up now. That matters. And I hope you'll remember this moment the next time you see someone being treated unfairly. Because silence, while comfortable, is a choice. And we all have the power to make a different choice. Henry nodded, his eyes damp. The cabin was silent for a moment. Then from the back of the business class section, someone started clapping. The applause spread. Slow at first, then building. Passengers standing. A full ovation echoing through the aircraft. Victoria remained in her seat, head down, hands covering her face. The Cartier bracelets that had glinted so confidently at the beginning of the flight now felt like weights dragging her down. Malcolm's phone buzzed with an incoming message from Arthur F. S.A. Raids complete. Seized over 40 terabytes of data from Whitmore offices. Evidence is overwhelming. They're finished. High Court injunction approved. All proxy votes frozen indefinitely. Friday board meeting officially canceled. WSJ and FT both published full exposés. Whitmore Capital stock down 67% in after-hours trading. Firm will declare bankruptcy by Monday. 4 board members Ashford bribed have resigned and turned over evidence. All 4 accepting immunity deals. Metropolitan Police waiting at Heathrow. Detective David Porter personally requested to handle the arrest. He said, and I quote, "It'll be my pleasure. B. Malcolm, you didn't just stop this takeover, you destroyed the entire infrastructure they were building. This is going to reshape how hostile acquisitions are regulated. You've changed the industry. Welcome home, sir. We've missed you." Malcolm typed back, "See you in 30 minutes. And Arthur, make sure every employee knows their jobs are safe and their pensions are protected. Send a company-wide message before market open." He put the phone away and sat back down. The applause was fading now. Passengers were settling back into their seats, checking their seat belts, preparing for landing. But the energy in the cabin had fundamentally changed. This wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a shared experience. A moment that everyone aboard would remember and retell for the rest of their lives. Eric was still live streaming. His viewer count had hit 2 million. "Folks," he said into his phone camera, "if you ever wondered whether justice still exists in this world, I just watched it unfold at 40,000 feet. This is what accountability looks like when people with power choose to do the right thing instead of the profitable thing." He turned the camera toward Malcolm. "Mr. Durant, on behalf of everyone watching, thank you. Not just for protecting your employees, but for reminding us that dignity isn't determined by what you wear or how much money you have. It's determined by how you treat people when no one important is watching." Malcolm nodded in acknowledgement, but said nothing. The Boeing 787 broke through the clouds. London sprawled below, gray and wet and beautiful in the early morning light. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Mitchell's voice returned to the PA system. "We're on final approach. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position." He paused, then added, "And Mr. Durant, welcome home, sir. It's been an honor having you aboard." The wheels touched down with barely a jolt. Captain Mitchell had delivered a perfect landing. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Victoria looked out the window and saw them 4 Metropolitan Police vehicles with flashing blue lights surrounding the jet bridge. "Oh, God." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh, God, no." Malcolm gathered his canvas duffel from the overhead compartment. He slung it over his shoulder, the same battered bag he'd been carrying all morning. He looked at Victoria one last time. "You mentioned earlier that you've never lost a case, Ms. Ashford." His voice was gentle, almost sad. "I suppose there's a first time for everything." The aircraft came to a complete stop. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and Victoria Ashford's life as she knew it ended. The cabin door opened with a mechanical hiss. Cool London air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and jet fuel. Detective David Porter entered first, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He was in his late 40s with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades dealing with white-collar criminals who thought they were untouchable. Porter walked past Malcolm with a respectful nod. "Mr. Durant. Good to see you again, sir." "David." Malcolm shook his hand. "Thank you for coming personally. Wouldn't miss it." Porter turned toward Victoria, who remained frozen in her seat. "Victoria Ashford." She didn't respond. She seemed to have retreated somewhere deep inside herself, unable to process what was happening. Miss Ashford Porter continued, his voice formal and measured. "I'm Detective Inspector David Porter of the Metropolitan Police Financial Crimes Unit. We have a high court order authorizing the seizure of your electronic devices and your detention for questioning regarding allegations of corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and attempted theft of trade secrets." Victoria's lips moved, but no sound came out. "You have the right to contact legal counsel. You'll be given that opportunity at the station. Please stand and come with us." The two uniformed officers moved to either side of her seat. Victoria stood on shaking legs. Her ivory cashmere dress was wrinkled and stained with champagne. The Hermes Birkin bag that had occupied Malcolm's seat at the beginning of the flight was placed in a clear evidence bag by one of the officers. As she was led down the aisle, every passenger watched in complete silence, some with satisfaction, some with pity, most with the uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing a life being dismantled in real time. When Victoria reached Malcolm, she stopped. The officers paused, allowing her a moment. "I didn't know." Her voice was hollow, empty of the arrogance that had defined her hours earlier. "I swear, I didn't know who you were." Malcolm met her gaze steadily. "I know you didn't. That's what makes this so tragic. You judged me by my appearance. You decided I didn't belong in your space, and then you bragged about destroying my life's work because you were so certain I could never affect you." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But the real problem, Ms. Ashford, isn't that you didn't recognize me. It's that you forgot that every person deserves basic human respect regardless of how they're dressed or where you think they belong. You treated me as less than human. And in doing so, you revealed exactly who you are." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." "I believe you are." Malcolm's voice held no anger, only sadness. "But sorry doesn't undo the damage you intended to cause. Sorry doesn't restore the lives you were willing to destroy for a bonus." Porter touched Victoria's elbow gently. "Ma'am, we need to go." Victoria was led off the aircraft, her designer heels clicking weakly against the jet bridge floor. She never looked back. Malcolm waited until she was gone. Then he turned to find Arthur Brennan waiting at the gate entrance. Arthur was 60 years old, silver-haired, wearing an impeccably tailored suit despite the early hour. He extended his hand and Malcolm shook it firmly. "Malcolm, hell of a flight, I imagine." "You have no idea." Malcolm allowed himself a small smile. They walked through the terminal together, Arthur briefing him as they moved. "Whitmore Capital is in complete collapse. Their institutional investors pulled $800 million in funding within 3 hours of the news breaking. The firm will file for bankruptcy protection by Monday. Ashford and Klein is in chaos. 6 partners resigned overnight. The managing partner issued a statement claiming they had no knowledge of Victoria's methods, which nobody believes. They'll be defending lawsuits for the next decade. And our board's solid." Arthur smiled. "The 3 members Ashford tried to bribe have all resigned and turned over evidence. We're appointing replacements next week, people who actually believe in what we're building." Malcolm nodded. "And the employees, I sent a company-wide message 30 minutes ago. Jobs are safe, pensions are protected, morale is through the roof. The London office is planning a celebration when you arrive." As they walked through the arrivals hall, Malcolm noticed people staring. Some were pointing. A few raised their phones to take photos. Then someone started clapping. It began with a single person, a middle-aged woman in an airport uniform. Then others joined. A janitor, a security guard, passengers waiting for their flights. Within seconds, the entire arrivals hall was applauding. Malcolm stopped, surprised. He wasn't accustomed to public recognition. He'd spent his entire career working quietly, building his empire without fanfare or self-promotion. But these weren't people celebrating a billionaire. They were celebrating something else entirely. A black father with 2 young children approached. He extended his hand. "Mr. Durant, thank you. My cousin works for your airline. She called me this morning crying, telling me you'd saved her pension. You didn't just protect your company, sir. You protected families like mine." Malcolm shook his hand, his throat tight. "That's what companies are supposed to do." They walked outside to where a black sedan waited. As Arthur opened the door, a cluster of journalists rushed forward, cameras flashing. "Mr. Durant, can you comment on the viral video? Sir, is it true you personally stopped a hostile takeover from first class? What message do you have for other CEOs facing similar threats?" Malcolm paused. He looked at the cameras, then at Arthur, then back at the journalists. "I'll make one brief statement." The cameras focused, microphones extended. What happened on that flight was not about me. It was about the 47,000 people who work for Durant Global people who deserve to be treated with dignity, to have their pensions protected, and to know that their leadership will fight for them. Hostile takeovers are part of business, but the tactics used by Whitmore Capital and their legal team crossed the line into criminal behavior. They attempted to steal retirement security from 20,000 people. That's not business. That's theft. He paused, his voice strengthening. To other CEOs, your greatest asset isn't your stock price or your quarterly earnings. It's your people. And if you're not willing to fight for them, he looked directly into the nearest camera, then you don't deserve to lead them. Malcolm got into the car. Arthur followed, and they pulled away from the curb. Inside the sedan, Malcolm finally allowed himself to relax. He leaned back against the leather seat, closing his eyes. "You handled that perfectly." Arthur's voice was warm. "The press is going to love it." "I don't care about the press." Malcolm opened his eyes. "I care about making sure this never happens again. Not just to our company, but to any company." Arthur pulled out his tablet. "I've been working on that. Legal is drafting a proposal for enhanced whistleblower protections in hostile takeover situations. We're going to lobby for regulatory changes that make these kinds of predatory acquisitions much more difficult." "Good." Malcolm looked out the window at London, rolling past. Rain streaked the glass. "And Arthur, I want to establish a legal defense fund. Small businesses that get targeted by firms like Whitmore need resources to fight back. We'll fund it personally. How much? $50 million to start. If we need more, we'll add more." Arthur made a note on his tablet. $50 million. Done. They rode in silence for a few minutes. Then Arthur said quietly, "You know, Malcolm, most people in your position would have had Victoria arrested the moment she sat down, or exposed her immediately, or humiliated her publicly." Malcolm shook his head. That wouldn't have accomplished anything. She needed to reveal herself. She needed to show everyone who she really was. Not just me, but the witnesses, the passengers, the people watching online. If I'd shut her down immediately, she could have claimed it was a misunderstanding. She could have framed herself as the victim. Instead, he continued, she spent 3 hours detailing her criminal conspiracy to the very person she was targeting. She did this while being recorded by multiple people. She bragged about destroying 47,000 lives because she was so certain that I was nobody who mattered. She destroyed herself, Arthur. I just gave her the rope. The car pulled up to the Durant Global headquarters in Canary Wharf, a gleaming tower of glass and steel. As Malcolm stepped out, employees were already gathering in the lobby, having heard about the flight, about the video, about everything. He walked through the revolving doors and the entire atrium erupted in applause. Hundreds of people, analysts, engineers, administrative staff, custodial workers, all cheering, some crying, all grateful. Malcolm stood in the center of the lobby looking around at the faces of people who depended on him, people whose lives he'd protected. He raised a hand and the applause gradually faded. "Thank you." His voice carried easily through the space. "But I need you to understand something. What happened on that flight wasn't about me being clever or powerful. It was about someone revealing who they truly are when they think no one important is watching." He paused, making eye contact with people throughout the crowd. "Every one of you matters. Your jobs matter. Your families matter. Your futures matter. And as long as I have breath in my body, I will fight to protect that. No company, no private equity vulture, no lawyer in a designer dress will ever take that away from you." The applause started again, louder this time. Malcolm smiled and headed toward the elevators, Arthur at his side. As the doors closed, Arthur said quietly, "You know the video has 47 million views now, right?" Malcolm shrugged. "The video doesn't matter. What matters is that every employee in this building knows their leadership has their back. That's the only metric I care about." 6 months later, Victoria Ashford stood in a London courtroom and pled guilty to conspiracy to commit securities fraud, attempted corporate espionage, and bribery of corporate officers. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and barred from practicing law for life. The woman who had once measured her worth by designer labels and first-class tickets learned that reputation once destroyed cannot be bought back at any price. Malcolm Durant never attended the sentencing. He was too busy doing what he'd always done, protecting his company and the people who depended on it. Durant Global Holdings didn't just survive the attempted takeover, it thrived. Employee retention reached an all-time high. Pension contributions increased by 20%. And the company launched the Durant Defense Initiative, a $50 million legal defense fund to help small businesses fight predatory acquisitions. The video Eric Caldwell live-streamed became one of the most watched justice moments in internet history, over 80 million views and counting. But for Malcolm, the real victory wasn't viral fame or legal vindication. It was boarding another flight 3 months later wearing the same gray hoodie and having a young black flight attendant whisper, "My mom saw your story. She told me never to let anyone make me feel like I don't belong." That Malcolm knew was worth more than any stock price. Channel Owner Reflection. I want to take a moment to speak to you directly because this story carries lessons that extend far beyond a first-class cabin. Here's what Malcolm Durant understood that Victoria Ashford never did. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. Victoria wore her success like armor designer clothes, expensive jewelry, elite status. She believed those things gave her the right to judge others. But the moment she encountered someone who didn't fit her narrow definition of belonging, her entire worldview shattered. Malcolm wore a hoodie and carried a canvas bag. Not because he couldn't afford better, but because he didn't need external validation to know his worth. That's the first lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance. The person you dismiss in the waiting room might own the building. The quiet passenger in the hoodie might control your entire industry. You simply don't know, and that uncertainty should make you humble, not arrogant. The second lesson is about how we treat people when we think no one important is watching. Victoria was cruel to Malcolm because she thought he was powerless. She mocked him, belittled him, tried to have him removed, all because she believed there would be no consequences. But here's the truth. How you treat people when you think they can't affect you reveals who you actually are. Character isn't what you show your boss or your clients. Character is how you treat the flight attendant, the janitor, the person sitting next to you in a hoodie. The third lesson is about justice. Malcolm didn't destroy Victoria out of revenge. He protected his company and his employees. The consequences she faced were the direct result of her own illegal actions. Actions she proudly detailed because she thought Malcolm was beneath her notice. Justice isn't about getting even. It's about ensuring those who abuse power are held accountable and that those who are vulnerable are protected. This story also reminds us that the world is more interconnected than we realize. Victoria thought she was safe bragging about her plans because she assumed Malcolm was irrelevant. But in our modern world, where anyone can live stream, where information travels instantly, there are no truly private moments of cruelty. Your actions, your words, your treatment of others can echo far beyond the immediate moment. And when that echo reaches the wrong person or the right person, the consequences can be swift and absolute. So here's my advice. Treat everyone with respect, not because you're afraid of who they might be, but because respect is the baseline of human decency. Assume that every interaction might be recorded, might go viral, might define how you're remembered, because increasingly that's the world we live in. And most importantly, build your life on substance, not symbols. Victoria built hers on designer labels and status markers, and it collapsed in a single flight. Malcolm built his on integrity, loyalty, and genuine care for others, and it withstood a coordinated attack from a billion-dollar firm. At 40,000 feet or at ground level, the rules are the same. True power is quiet. Real success is measured by the lives you improve, not the empires you destroy. And dignity, both yours and others, is the currency that actually matters. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below sharing a time when you were judged unfairly or when you witnessed karma in action. Your story matters, and together we build a world where people like Malcolm don't have to fight these battles alone. Until next time, fly with integrity.